When you visit the big military museums in Britain, you will see plenty of vehicles and planes and artillery guns that belong to Nazi Germany, and probably a few also from Italy. But for some reason, the third Axis adversary, Japan, is always severely underrepresented, despite the fact that the Far Eastern Theatre was one of the biggest, the British Empire's military theatres of World War II.
The British 14th Army in Burma jumped the gun on the monsoon season. The respite the Japanese armies had expected was not granted. Under constant air and ground pressure, the enemy was thrown back from Imperial and Kohima. The enemy has been taught some new tricks in jungle fighting by the 14th. Ammunition dumps were left behind as the Nipponese fell back. The rising sun has begun to set throughout the Far East. Supreme Commander Mountbatten inspects his units in the Manipur sector. Battered enemy tanks dot this territory, just wrested from the Japanese. Hurricane fighter bombers sweep in to attack a jungle village. These versatile craft have not only helped remove the Jap to India, they are now hastening the liberation of Burma and the entire East Asia sector.
Very few Japanese weapons and planes were sent to the UK during or after the war. All this means that aside from displays of uniforms, small arms and Japanese swords often picked up on battlefields or surrendered at the end of the war, and easily portable souvenirs or trophies for British soldiers, you won't be seeing the big stuff like you do with the German equipment. However, this video gives a rundown, in no particular order, of the remaining large vehicles, guns and aircraft of Imperial Japan currently on public display in Britain. Before we get into the list, a quick word from today's sponsor. War Thunder is the most comprehensive vehicle combat game ever made. Play more than 2,000 tanks, aircraft, helicopters and ships in dynamic combined arms PvP battles. As an historian, I appreciate that the vehicles in War Thunder span over 100 years of development, from the 1920s to the present day. Every vehicle is incredibly detailed and modeled, offering a highly immersive combat experience. War Thunder has incredible graphics and detail in 4K resolution to create the immersion you need. Play War Thunder now on PC, PlayStation or Xbox using the link on the screen. You receive a large, free bonus pack for registering using my personalized link, including multiple premium vehicles, premium account, boosters and much more. Beginning at number 10, we have an interesting and very rare aircraft. A wreck at the Wings Museum in Balcombe, West Sussex. This portion of fuselage and wings are the ruins of Imperial Japan's most iconic World War II torpedo bomber, the Nakajima B5N2, codenamed the Kate by Allied forces. Introduced in 1938, the Kate played a vital role in the early battles of the Pacific War, notably the attack on Pearl Harbor in Hawaii on the 7th of December 1941, the Battle of the Coral Sea and the Battle of Midway, both in 1942, and many other engagements based on Japan's large fleet of aircraft carriers. Having a crew of 3, it carried one 800-kilo Type 91 torpedo, or variety of aerial bombs, with a cruising speed of 161 miles per hour and a range of 608 miles. Of 1,149 that were built, only 2 exist in the world today, both of them wrecks. One at the Pearl Harbor Aviation Museum in Honolulu, and this wreck at the Wings Museum in the UK. This Kate wreck was recovered from the Kuril Islands in Russia's Far East by a private British collector in 2003 and is presented in as-found condition. All the flying Kates that you see at air shows and movies are reproductions based on the North American T-6 Texan training aircraft. At number 9 is an artillery weapon, the Type 41 75mm mountain gun. This weapon is a license-built copy of the German Krupp M1908 mountain gun and served the Japanese Army from 1908 to 1945. This gun could be easily broken down into its constituent parts and man-hauled by soldiers or placed on pack horses and taken over rugged, mountainous terrain to be quickly reassembled and put into action. It had a 13-man crew and fired 75mm high-explosive, anti-tank, white phosphorus, incendiary or shrapnel shells. During World War II, the Type 41 was mostly used as an infantry regimental gun, with 4 deployed to each infantry regiment. Maximum range was 7,679 yards, or just over 7 kilometers. Osaka Arsenal built up to 3,800 of these guns, and there are several on display in museums globally, with this example captured in Burma at the Imperial War Museum, Duxford in Cambridgeshire. Position number 8 is also a vehicle at Duxford. The remains are one of Japan's most famous World War II fighters, the Mitsubishi A6M-0. Entering service in 1940, the Imperial Japanese Navy's Zeros were outstanding dogfighters and dominated the skies over China, Southeast Asia, and the Pacific until 1943, when they were eventually outclassed by Allied types. 10,939 were built, and today most of the surviving examples are composite aircraft, built from parts from multiple airframes. Only one Zero is still airworthy with its original Sake 21 engine. This Zero was built in 1944 and was captured intact in 1945, probably in Malaya, one of several airframes turned over to the Allied Technical Air Intelligence Unit, Southeast Asia, hence the markings, where it was extensively test-flown. 4 Japanese aircraft, including this Zero, were later shipped from Singapore to Britain just after the war, but the Zero was damaged in transit and was unable to fly on reaching the UK. At some point, this airframe was taken to pieces, with most of it scrapped, leaving only the cockpit and the undercarriage, which has been on display since 1961 at the Imperial War Museum, Duxford. Interestingly, this aircraft's original Sake 21 engine still exists. It is currently on display at the Royal Air Force Museum at Cosford. It would be wonderful if the Imperial War Museum and the RAF Museum cooperated to reunite the engine with the fuselage section for display. If this was done, and perhaps with the addition of reproduction wings and fuselage and tail, it could be quite a sight, the only complete Zero in Europe. At number 7, we have one of the most feared Japanese weapons of World War II, the Type 93 Long Lance torpedo. A 610mm or 24-inch diameter torpedo, the Long Lance entered Japanese naval service in 1933 for use aboard warships. It was propelled by kerosene oxidized with oxygen-enriched air, giving the 2.7-ton torpedo a maximum speed of an astounding 96 kilometers an hour. And a maximum firing range of 40 kilometers or 44,200 yards. 9 meters or just over 30 feet long, its warhead weighed 1,080 pounds or 490 kilos, and its high speed, long range and heavy warhead made it an extremely effective weapon, miles ahead of comparable Allied torpedoes of the period. Mounted on cruisers and destroyers, they scored some significant warship kills, launched well out of range of Allied guns. Notable Allied warships lost to the Long Lance include HMS Exeter, a British heavy cruiser, and the US heavy cruisers USS Houston and USS Northampton, as well as the aircraft carrier USS Hornet, which was extremely badly damaged and later sunk by the Americans. A few examples of this torpedo survive in museums, including this example, which has been opened up to show the mechanics of the weapon, currently on display at the Imperial War Museum, Duxford. Another Long Lance is in storage at Explosion, Museum of Naval Firepower at the National Museum of the Royal Navy, Gosport, Hampshire. At number 6 is a complete Kawasaki Ki100 fighter. A single-seat monoplane fighter used by the Imperial Japanese Army Air Service. Entering service in February 1945, 396 were built. It was one of the best interceptor aircraft used by the Japanese Army in the war, a very late-war fighter that saw service against the Boeing B-29 Superfortresses that were turning Japan to ash in the last months of the war, and against escorting US P-51 Mustangs, and against US Navy F-6F Hellcat carrier fighters. This example is the Ki-100 1B version, having a cut-down rear fuselage and to be used to equip home defense squadrons. This aircraft was captured at an airfield in Saigon in Japanese-occupied French Indochina in August 1945, having been damaged on delivery in a landing accident. It was shipped to Britain alongside the Zero we saw earlier and 2 other Japanese planes, and for years was misidentified as a Nakajima Ki-43 Oscar. It spent decades in RAF storage until restored and placed on display at the Royal Air Force Museum, Hendon, London. Between 2012 and 2022, it was displayed at the museum's second site at Cosford before returning to London. It is the only Ki-100 still in existence. At number 5 is a big gun. This Imperial Japanese Army 150mm field gun sits in War Memorial Park in Romsey, Hampshire. Surrendered at the end of the war in Southeast Asia, it was presented to Romsey by the former Supreme Allied Commander Southeast Asia, Admiral Viscount Mountbatten of Burma in 1946, in recognition of the townspeople's service, both military and civil, during World War II. Mountbatten's association with Romsey came about because his home, Broadlands, was located close by. His full title in 1946 was First Viscount Mountbatten of Burma and Baron Romsey. In 1947 he was elevated to Earl Mountbatten. The Japanese gun in Romsey is a Type 96 15cm howitzer, the type entering Japanese service in 1937. The 4-ton gun had a maximum range of 11,900 meters or 13,000 yards, and the Romsey example is one of 5 existing in the world today out of 440 manufactured. At number 4 we have the second of the 2 Zero wrecks on display in the UK today. This one is considerably more complete than the one at Duxford. This particular airframe was one of many left on Pacific Islands after the war ended, left in the jungle and to local scrappers. Even today, many World War II Japanese plane wrecks remain on jungle airstrips. Delivered to the Imperial Japanese Navy in 1943, this aircraft served with the 252nd Kokotai or Squadron and was abandoned in 1944 on Tarawa Island in the Marshall Islands, this particular island being cut off during the US advance and its garrison left to starve. The Zero remained sitting on its belly and was progressively stripped by locals, including the engine, one of many Japanese engines that ended up scattered about the old airfield, several of them still there today. After many years of neglect, in 1991, a man called John Sterling recovered this Zero and 3 others from the island. They were crated up and shipped to his home in Boise, Idaho. He used 3 of the Zero wrecks to help rebuild the 4th aircraft. This wreck Zero was then sold to the Imperial War Museum and was shipped to Duxford. It is currently on display at the museum's London site, and apparently there are no plans to restore it to static display, which is a real shame, considering how much of the airframe is still there. At number 3 is one-of-a-kind artifact in the UK, a World War II Japanese tank. The Type 95 Hargo light tank entered combat in China in the 1930s, and proved a successful design against an enemy with very limited armoured forces or anti-tank capability. Some 2,300 of these little light tanks were built for the Imperial Japanese Army between 1936 and 1943, seeing extensive service during World War II. They were, along with the larger Type 97 Chi-Ha tanks, brutally effective in the Japanese drive down the Malayan Peninsula in 1941-42, where opposing British and Empire forces had no tanks of their own and insufficient anti-tank weapons. They also proved somewhat effective against the Americans during the fighting in the Philippines. However, later in the war, the Type 95 proved very vulnerable when it came up against Allied medium tanks like the M4 Sherman, bazookas, and better anti-tank guns. Weighing just over 7 tons, the Hargo had a crew of 3 and was armed with a Type 94 37mm anti-tank gun and 2 Type 97 7.7mm machine guns. Capable of a maximum speed on a road of 28 miles per hour or 45 kilometers, its main drawback, apart from its small gun, was its thin armor. 12mm on the turret front, sides and rear, the hull front and the hull sides, and 6 to 9mm on the rear and turret roof. Large numbers survived the war, many being used by the Communist Chinese forces during the Chinese Civil War, alongside other Japanese weapons and vehicles, and some were sold to Thailand, serving on in both countries well into the 1950s. Quite a number are in drivable condition or static museum exhibits today, but the only one on display in Britain is at the Tank Museum at Bovington, Dorset. At number 2 is another rare and complete Japanese warplane, a Mitsubishi Ki46, codenamed Dyna by the Allies, and one of the 4 Japanese aircraft shipped from Singapore to Britain in 1946-47. A twin-engine reconnaissance aircraft used by the Imperial Japanese Army Air Service, it entered service with the Japanese in China and Manchuria in the late 1930s, and went on to serve in most Japanese theatres of war. Towards war's end, some were modified with cannons and used as high-altitude bomber interceptors over the home islands, trying to shoot down B-29 superfortresses. Having a crew of 2, the Ki-46 was 11 meters or 36 feet long, with a wingspan of almost 15 meters or 48 feet. His cruising speed was 250 miles per hour for a range of 1,500 miles and a service ceiling of 35,000 feet. The Allies captured several examples, which were test-flown. This is the only Ki-46 out of 1,742 built to survive today, constructed in 1943 and serving in Malaya when Japan surrendered. In 1998, the Ministry of Defense transferred ownership to the RAF Museum, and in 2022 it was moved to the museum's London site at Hendon, where you can see it today in pristine condition. And at number 1 is a weapon which showed exactly how desperate Japan became towards war's end in its efforts to stave off inevitable defeat. The Yokosuka MXY7 Ora, or Cherry Blossom, was a rocket-powered, human-guided bomb, the intention being that the pilot fly this very fast aircraft into enemy shipping, naturally perishing in the attempt. Entering into service in spring 1945, hundreds were built, and some did actually see action against Allied warships through to the end of June 1945. The rocket-powered plane could achieve speeds close on 620 miles per hour or 1,000 kilometers an hour during the final dive on the target, and due to its small size and rapid speed, it was much more difficult to shoot down than ordinary kamikazes, which were simply modified Japanese fighters and bombers sent on one-way missions.
Night it went on. Hundreds of land-based planes streaked low over the sea at our carrier. dove out of the dawn, raced through dull overcast to throw themselves in screaming, smoking fury at Admiral Richmond Kelly Turner's ships off Okinawa.
The Allies nicknamed the Orcas Baka bombs, after the Japanese word for fool. During the Battle of Okinawa, Orcas, air-launched from bombers, sank or damaged a handful of US escort vessels and transport ships, but too few were deployed to really make much of a difference. The most common form of the aircraft was the Model 22, armed with a 1,200 kilo or 2,600 pound Amonol warhead, equivalent to a large torpedo strike. The Orca is the commonest World War II Japanese plane found in museums, as so many were captured intact following Japan's surrender. In Britain, 4 Orcas are on public display today, one at the RAF Museum at Hendon, one at the Fleet Air Arm Museum at Yeovilton in Somerset, one at the Imperial War Museum Duxford, and one at the Museum of Science and Technology in Manchester. Play War Thunder now on PC, PlayStation or Xbox using the link on the screen. Remember, you receive a large free bonus pack for registering using my personalized link, including multiple premium vehicles, premium account, boosters and much more. War Thunder, get it now! Thanks for watching, please subscribe and share, and also visit my audiobook channel, War Stories with Mark Felton. You can also help to support both of my channels at PayPal and Patreon, details in the description box below.